The first thing Isabella Rodriguez felt was the blinding weight in her skull, as though someone had split her head open and poured the night's chaos straight inside. Her lashes fluttered against the unfamiliar brightness, and she shifted against a mattress that was far too soft, far too forgiving, nothing like the lumpy bed she dragged herself into every night in her cramped downtown studio. For a moment she thought she might still be dreaming, but then her eyes opened fully, and reality swept in like a storm she hadn't braced for. The ceiling above her gleamed pristine white, edged with intricate crown molding that whispered of wealth, taste, and indulgence, the kind of detail she could only admire in magazines while eating instant noodles. She pushed herself upright, heart hammering as her gaze darted around the enormous room. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed a glittering skyline that seemed to stretch forever, the glass glowing faintly with the early morning sun. The furnishings were all sleek black and shimmering gold, every angle sharp, every surface polished. The air even smelled expensive, clean, cool, tinged with something masculine she couldn't place. Her breath caught as she looked down at herself. Instead of her fitted dress from the night before, she was draped in an oversized silk shirt that slid off one shoulder, brushing against bare skin. It wasn't hers. The fabric carried a scent, cologne layered with warmth, a scent that pulled at her pulse even as her stomach twisted with dread. Beneath it, only her lace underwear. She clutched the shirt tightly around her body, panic prickling up her spine. Where am I? The thought burned louder than her headache. Memories darted in flashes. Monica's gallery, champagne flutes clinking, laughter, someone's hand on her arm as the world tilted. And then nothing but darkness. She could remember stumbling out into the net. There, dizzy, unsteady, searching for her car, but the next frame was a void she couldn't climb out of. The sound of a door opening snapped her attention across the room. Her pulse skittered dangerously when she saw him. A man stepped in, tall, towering really, broad shoulders filling the doorway with an ease that made the vast room seem suddenly smaller. His black trousers clung perfectly, his white shirt rolled at the sleeves to reveal strong, tanned forearms. Tousled dark hair framed a face that was too handsome, too sculpted, almost unreal. But it was his eyes, piercing blue, cool and sharp, that pinned her where she sat. "Good morning, Sleeping Beauty." His voice was deep, smooth, carrying a trace of amusement that both soothed and unnerved her. He carried a steaming cup of coffee, as if this were the most natural thing in the world. Him entering, her waiting. "I was wondering when you'd wake up. You've been out for quite some time." Her throat dried as she hugged the silk shirt tighter, painfully aware of her bare legs beneath it. Who are you?" Her voice trembled despite her best effort to sound steady. "Where am I? And why am I?" She hesitated, heat rising to her cheeks. "Wearing your shirt?" He smiled then, slow and confident, the kind of smile that suggested he already knew the effect it would have. "Damian Blackwell, you're in my penthouse, and as for the shirt, well, your dress didn't survive the evening." His words sent another chill racing down her spine. "Didn't survive?" she echoed, panic sharpening her tone. "What do you mean? What happened to me last night?" Damian set the coffee on the nightstand with careful grace before leaning against the wall, arms folded, those blue eyes never leaving her face. "Relax," he said, his voice low and steady, though his gaze carried an intensity that made her shiver. "Nothing happened. Not the way you're imagining. I found you outside the Morrison Gallery. You were barely conscious, and some man was trying to drag you toward his car. He wasn't going to stop until I convinced him otherwise." The words hit her chest like ice water. A memory surfaced. The alley, the slick hand on her arm, the reek of alcohol, a voice whispering ugly things in her ear. She pressed her palm to her temple, trying to steady her breathing. "The man in the blue jacket," she whispered, the image slotting back into place. "That's the one." Damian's gaze softened slightly. "You're safe now. I brought you here because when I asked for your address, you mumbled something about not wanting to go home. Someone named Trevor, I think. You were terrified." At the name, her stomach twisted sharply. Trevor. The ghost she'd been trying to outrun for months. And now, this stranger, this billionaire, knew the name too. She looked at Damien again, really looked. He was composed, unreadable, and yet something in his stance, in the calm certainty of his words, radiated safety. It unsettled her almost as much as waking in his bed. The silence between them stretched, heavy with questions. She had no idea what this man's intentions were, why fate had thrown her into his world, or how much she'd revealed while half-conscious. But one thing was certain. Her life had shifted the moment she opened her eyes, and she wasn't sure if she'd stepped into sanctuary or danger. Isabella sat frozen on the edge of the vast bed, the taste of fear and unanswered questions sharp in her throat. Damien's words echoed in her ears, each one peeling back another layer of last night's shadows. She remembered flashes of the man in the alley, the rough grip on her arm, the smell of whiskey on his breath. Her skin prickled at the memory and she shivered, pulling the silk shirt tighter around her body, as though it could shield her from what had almost happened. Damien moved closer, not enough to invade her space, but just enough to remind her that he was real, that he was here, that he had seen everything she could not. The was a steadiness about him, a controlled calm that was more unsettling than comforting. He spoke with the authority of someone used to being obeyed, yet his tone carried a thread of concern that disarmed her. She wanted to trust him, but a part of her whispered not to. Men with power always came with shadows of their own. Her gaze swept across the room again, trying to ground herself. The penthouse was silent except for the hum of the city beyond the windows, a silence that felt too deliberate, like the calm before something dangerous. Every gleaming surface, every perfectly placed piece of furniture reminded her of how far she was from her own world of peeling paint and second-hand couches. How had she gone from sipping champagne at her friend's gallery to sitting half-dressed in the home of one of the most powerful men she had ever laid eyes on? Her voice cracked when she finally spoke. "Why didn't you take me to the hospital? Why not call the police if you saw what that man was trying to do to me?" Damien studied her, his expression unreadable, the blue in his eyes sharp as steel. "Because you didn't want to be found. You kept whispering it over and over. That someone named Trevor would be waiting for you if you went home, that he always knew where you were." He tilted his head slightly, curiosity flickering across his face. "Who is Trevor Isabella?" Her stomach clenched. Even his name made her heart pound with dread. Trevor was the ghost that had never stopped haunting her, the man who once made her feel cherished and later made her feel like property. She could almost hear his voice, dripping with charm that always carried a threat underneath. She hated that Damien now knew, that her carefully hidden fear had slipped from her lips in the fog of unconsciousness. She looked away, ashamed, yet Damien's gaze pinned her. "You don't have to tell me everything now," he said, Wheatley, "but know this, Isabella Rodriguez. Whoever this Trevor is, he won't come near you while you're under my roof." His words should have soothed her, yet they sent a shiver of unease down her spine. There was something final in the way he said it, a promise laced with steel. She wanted to argue, to tell him she didn't need protection, that she could handle her own battles, but her hands trembled as she wrapped the silk fabric tighter around herself. She hated that he saw the truth she tried to bury, that a part of her wanted to believe him. Damien moved toward the door, his steps silent on the marble floor. "Get dressed. There are clothes in the closet. Join me in the kitchen when you're ready. We need to talk." The words landed heavy. Not an invitation, not a suggestion, a command. As the door closed behind him, Isabella pressed her palms to her face. Her pulse was wild, her heart torn between gratitude and suspicion. She had stepped into a stranger's world, and nothing about it felt safe. Yet a darker thought gnawed at her chest. Perhaps she wasn't meant to feel safe. She slid off the bed, her bare feet touching the cool floor, and walked toward the closet. Each step echoed louder than the last, the silence thick with questions that refused to be answered. What did he really want from her? What had she said last night that she couldn't remember? And why did his voice linger in her mind like a promise she didn't dare trust? She opened the closet door, and her breath caught again. Because inside hung not just clothes prepared for her, but something else, a single framed photograph tucked on the shelf. A woman's face she didn't recognize staring back at her with eyes that looked hauntingly like her own. Isabella's fingers trembled as she held the photograph from the closet shelf. The frame was heavy, gilded, like everything else in the penthouse, but what made her skin prickle was the woman's face staring back at her. Dark hair, soft features, eyes that carried a depth of pain and strength, eyes that looked eerily similar to her own. She had never seen this man before, yet she felt an undeniable pull, as if the image was whispering secrets she wasn't ready to hear. Why would Damien keep this hidden among his perfectly ordered possessions? The sound of footsteps approached from the hallway, steady and unhurried, and she slipped the frame back onto the shelf before the door opened. Damien entered without knocking, his presence filling the space like a storm rolling in. He took in the sight of her still in his shirt, the photograph no longer in her hands, and something flickered across his expression. A shadow, quickly concealed by that mask of calm confidence. "I see you found the closet," he said, his tone smooth, almost casual, but his eyes lingered a little too long, as though he was measuring her reaction. She tried to steady her breathing. "I was looking for the clothes you mentioned. There was something else in there. A photo. Who is she?" His gaze sharpened, a flash of steel beneath the surface. "Someone I lost a long time ago. That's all you need to know for now." His voice carried finality, the kind that warned her not to push further. Yet the guarded edge only deepened the mystery, making her wonder what scars this billionaire carried behind his polished life. Damien gestured toward the hall. "Breakfast is ready. You'll feel more like yourself once you've eaten." His words left no room for refusal, but his voice softened slightly, almost coaxing. She followed him, each step heavy with unease, her bare legs brushing against the oversized shirt as they moved into the open kitchen. The space was as sleek as the bedroom, steel counters gleaming under warm light, machines humming quietly. Damien moved with practiced ease, plating eggs and pouring coffee, a man equally at home in boardrooms and his own kitchen. Isabella sat cautiously at the marble island, her eyes flicking between the elegant food before her and the man, who had rescued her from danger, only to bring her into a world she didn't understand. He slid the plate toward her, then leaned against the counter, watching her with an intensity that made her stomach twist. "Eat," he said simply. The first bite warmed her, chasing away some of the lingering fog in her head, but it didn't calm the storm in her chest. She finally broke the silence. "Why me, Damien? You could have called the police. You could have left me on the sidewalk. Why bring me here?" He studied her for a long moment before answering, his jaw tightening as if weighing how much truth to reveal. "Because the man I saw dragging you looked like the kind who doesn't stop until he gets what he wants. And because when you whispered Trevor's name, you looked more afraid than anyone I've ever seen. That wasn't fear of a stranger. That was fear of someone who already knew how to break you." Her breath caught at his words, the sharp accuracy of them. He had seen too much. She wanted to deny it, to tell him he was wrong, but the lump in her throat refused to let her speak. Damien's eyes softened, though his voice remained firm. "Whoever Trevor is, he doesn't get to control you anymore, not while you're here." Isabella set her fork down, her heart pounding louder than the city noise outside. She didn't know this man, didn't know what his promises meant, yet sitting there in his penthouse, she couldn't ignore the truth that her life had just crossed into dangerous territory. Between the photograph in the closet, Damien's cryptic words, and Trevor's looming shadow, she sensed that she had stumbled into a story much bigger than a drunken night gone wrong. And the worst part was, she wasn't sure she wanted to leave. Isabella spent the rest of the morning drifting through the penthouse in borrowed clothes, her mind tangled in too many questions to untangle. Every corner of the space screamed power and money, yet there was a hollowness to it, like a stage set designed to impress, but not to comfort. She ran her fingers along the EDGs of the black marble counter, the sterile perfection making her itch for something real, something warm. She had built her career dreaming of how to transform spaces like this. But standing here now, she felt like the one being transformed, drawn into a life she had no map for. Damien watched her from across the room, his arms folded, his expression unreadable. The silence stretched until it pressed against her skin, and then he finally broke it. "You don't like my home, do you, Isabella?" She froze, caught, heat rising to her face. "I didn't say that." "You didn't have to," he replied. "I saw it in your eyes last night before you passed out. You looked at this place like it was a museum exhibit. Beautiful, but cold." She opened her mouth to protest, but stopped, realizing he was right. "It is beautiful," she admitted softly, "but it doesn't feel alive. A space should tell a story. This one doesn't." His lips curved in something that wasn't quite a smile. "Then maybe you should write the story." Her brows knitted. "What do you mean?" He pushed off the counter, walking closer with that same measured confidence that unsettled her. "I was planning on hiring someone to redesign this place. But after hearing you talk about color and light, I realized you might be the one person bold enough to tell me the truth. What if I hired you to transform it?" The words landed like a thunderclap. Isabella blinked at him, half certain she had misheard. "You want me to design your penthouse? You don't even know my work. I know passion when I see it," he said. "And I know honesty when I hear it. You're not afraid to tell me what you think, even when it risks offending me. That makes you rare, Isabella. Rare and valuable." Her heart raced as she tried to make sense of his sudden offer. This was the kind of project that could change her career forever, but the way he said her name made her wonder if this was more than business. His eyes lingered a second too long, his voice softened at the edges, and it terrified her as much as it thrilled her. She shook her head slowly. "I barely know you, and after last night I'm not sure stepping deeper into your world is a good idea." Damien leaned closer, not enough to touch, but close enough that she could feel the heat of him, close enough that her breath caught. "That's something we can remedy," he said quietly. "Have dinner with me tonight. We'll talk about the project. You'll get to know your client." Her pulse fluttered wildly, her body betraying the warning bells clanging in her head. "Is this how you usually conduct business?" she asked, trying to sound steady. His eyes glinted with something darker. "No. Normally I keep my life divided, business on one side, personal on the other. But with you, Isabella, I find myself willing to make an exception." The air between them thickened, charged with something she couldn't name. She felt herself being pulled toward him, drawn into the gravity of his confidence, his intensity, his promise of something dangerous. Before she could respond, her phone buzzed on the counter. The sound jolted her back to reality, and when she saw the name flashing across the screen, the blood drained from her face. "Trevor." Her hands shook as she picked up the phone. One message glared back at her. "I know you're not at your apartment. Where are you, Isabella? We need to talk." Damien's eyes narrowed as he saw the screen, his voice dropping into steel. "Has he been following you?" She swallowed hard, her throat tight. "Probably. He always finds me. I thought leaving him would make it stop, but it hasn't." Damien stepped closer, his presence radiating a force that made her heart skip. "Then it ends now." His tone was a vow, sharp and unyielding, and she could see the storm gathering in his eyes. And in that moment, she realized that stepping into Damien Blackwell's world might not just change her career, it might change the course of her entire life. The phone slipped from Isabella's trembling hands and landed on the counter with a dull sound that seemed far too loud in the silent kitchen. Trevor's name still glared on the screen. The message burned into her mind like a scar. Damien picked it up, his jaw tightening as he read the words again. His blue eyes turned stormy, the calm mask he wore cracking to reveal a fury that made the air in the room feel charged. "How long has this been happening, Isabella?" he asked, his voice low but carrying the weight of command. "How long has this man been shadowing your every move?" She could barely find her voice. "Months. Ever since I left him. I thought if I ignored him, he'd stop. But it's only gotten worse. He shows up everywhere. My work, my building. Even when I think I've shaken him, he always finds me again." Damien placed the phone back down, carefully, as though holding back the urge to shatter it into pieces. "That's not persistence. That's obsession. And obsession is dangerous." He walked toward the windows, his hands pressed into his pockets, shoulders tense as he stared out at the city below. Isabella's chest tightened as she watched him, this man of power and control suddenly radiating something more primal, protection. anger, a promise of retribution. She didn't want to need that from him, but the truth was, she was tired. Tired of looking over her shoulder, tired of pretending Trevor was just a nuisance when deep down she knew he was a threat that could swallow her whole. Damien turned back, his gaze locking onto hers. I have resources, Isabella. Lawyers, security. If he's watching you, if he's following you, then he's already broken laws. We can end this. You don't have to fight him alone. His words hit her like a lifeline, yet also a chain. Because once she accepted his help, she would no longer be just Isabella Rodriguez, the designer fighting for her independence. She would be the woman under Damien Blackwell's protection, and she didn't know if that terrified her more than Trevor's shadow. Her lips parted, but before she could answer, the buzzer at the penthouse door rang. Both of them froze, their eyes snapping to the sound. It rang again, longer this time, insistent. Isabella's blood went cold. You're not expecting anyone, she whispered. Damien shook his head once. He crossed to a hidden panel near the wall, pressing a button that lit up the small security screen. The black and white feed flickered to life. Isabella's stomach dropped. Trevor. He stood in the hallway outside the penthouse door, his expression calm. Too calm, a man who believed he owned whatever space he stepped into. In his hands he carried a small envelope, and when he looked up at the camera, he smiled directly into it, as though he knew they were watching. How did he get up here? She whispered, panic clawing at her throat. There's security in this building. No one gets to this floor without clearance. Damien's jaw clenched. Which means someone let him through, someone he paid, or someone who already betrayed me. The buzzer rang again, sharp, shrill, cutting through the silence like a blade. Damien's voice was steady, but his eyes burned with cold fire. Stay here, Isabella. Do not open this door no matter what you hear. But her hand shot out, clutching his arm before he could move. If you open that door, he'll twist everything. He always does. He'll make you think he's harmless, make you doubt me. That's how he works. Damien covered her hand with his grip firm, grounding her. I don't doubt you, not for a second. The buzzer fell silent, and for a long moment, the only sound was the thundering of Isabella's heartbeat. Then, from the other side of the door, Trevor's voice carried in, smooth and sickly sweet. Isabella, baby, I know you're in there. We need to talk. You can't hide behind him forever. Her knees weakened at the sound, memories crashing over her like waves, but Damien's steady presence beside her kept her from collapsing. He looked at her then, his voice barely above a whisper, but filled with certainty. This ends tonight. The sound of Trevor's voice seeped through the door like poison, curling into Isabella's chest and stirring up every memory she had tried so hard to bury. She backed away, her pulse racing, but the walls of the penthouse felt like they were closing in. Damien stood motionless near the door, every muscle coiled, his jaw hard as stone. He wasn't afraid. That alone both steadied her and unnerved her. Trevor knocked, slow and deliberate, the echo sending a chill through the silence. Isabella pressed her hands to her ears, but she could still hear him. His tone changed, switching from sweet to sharp within a single breath. You think he can protect you, Isabella? Men like Damien Blackwell don't care about women like you. You're just another distraction. He'll get bored, and when he does, you'll come crawling back to me. Her stomach twisted. Trevor's words dug under her skin because he knew where her insecurities lived. He had planted them during their years together, carefully, cruelly, convincing her she was small, replaceable, dependent on his approval. Damien moved closer to the door, his voice cutting through Trevor's taunts with icy precision. She doesn't belong to you. She never did. Leave before I make sure you regret ever coming here. There was silence on the other side, a silence so heavy Isabella could hardly breathe. Then Trevor laughed, low and chilling. Always the hero, aren't you, Blackwell? I've been watching. I know what's happening between you and her. I wonder how your investors would feel about you sleeping with the woman decorating your penthouse. There was silence on the other side, a silence so heavy Isabella could hardly breathe. Then Trevor laughed, low and chilling. Always the hero, aren't you, Blackwell? I've been watching. I know what's happening between you and her. I wonder how your investors would feel about you sleeping with the woman decorating your penthouse. Isabella's blood froze. Her eyes darted to Damien, searching his face for fear, for hesitation, but there was none. Instead, his expression darkened, his voice steady. "You've crossed a line. This is harassment. The next time you try this, it won't be me answering the door. It will be the police." Trevor's voice hardened into steel. "Do that, and I'll make sure every headline in the city knows about your little secret." He tapped the envelope against the door, the sound a sickening rhythm. "Photographs don't lie." Isabella's chest caved in. She could picture them even without seeing. The stolen moments, the kiss that had meant so much to her, but now weaponized by Trevor's obsession. The thought of her career being smeared, of Damien's reputation crumbling, made her knees weaken. She whispered through clenched teeth, "Damien, please, don't push him. He doesn't make empty threats." Damien turned to her then, his eyes softer for just a breath, enough to ground her. "I don't care about his games. What I care about is you." The sound of retreating footsteps broke the moment. Trevor didn't knock again. He didn't call out. He simply walked away, leaving a silence even more suffocating than his presence. Damien checked the security feed, his shoulders taut. The elevator doors closed around Trevor, but the smug smile on his face promised this wasn't over. Isabella wrapped her arms around herself, trembling. "He has the photos. He'll ruin us." Damien crossed the room and placed his hands gently on her shoulders, forcing her to meet his gaze. "Then we don't hide. We fight. If he wants to play war, he chose the wrong opponent." Her breath caught at the certainty in his voice, but fear still tangled inside her. Trevor had always been dangerous, but now he was desperate, and desperate men were the most unpredictable of all. Morning sunlight poured through the tall windows of the penthouse, but for Isabella, it felt like the world had dimmed overnight. Sleep had been a cruel stranger, her thoughts trapped in the loop of Trevor's threats, his voice echoing in her skull long after he had disappeared from the security feed. She sat at the kitchen island, staring into a mug of untouched coffee, her stomach tight with dread. Damien emerged from his office, his shirt sleeves rolled, his phone pressed to his ear. Even mid-conversation, his presence commanded the room. His voice was clipped, sharp, a man giving orders, not requests. He ended the call and set the phone down, his blue eyes fixed on her with a focus that left no space for distraction. "He sent the photos, didn't he?" she whispered before he could speak. Damien's jaw tightened, and the silence was all the answer she needed. He walked toward her, sliding a folded sheet of paper across the counter. On it were glossy prints, blown up and cruelly precise. Isabella and Damien locked in an embrace near the windows, her lips tilted up to his, the city lights burning behind them. Photographs that should have been private, sacred, now twisted into evidence. Her chest constricted as she picked them up, the edges cutting against her fingers. How could he get these, Damien? How close was he? Damien leaned against the counter, his face unreadable but his voice edged with steel. "Close enough to remind me that someone let him in where he didn't belong. I've already started digging. Whoever's feeding him access will regret it." Isabella's throat tightened. "These aren't just pictures. He'll spin them. He'll make it look like I slept my way into this job. Every client I have will walk away. My career will be over." Damien reached across, his hand covering hers, the strength in his grip steadying her. "You think I care what people whisper about me? Let them talk. The truth is I hired you because you're brilliant, and no photograph changes that." "But what about you?" she asked, her voice shaking. "You have investors, partners, a company balanced on reputation. He's not just after me. He's after you." For the first time, she saw a flicker of something raw in his eyes, a flash of vulnerability that slipped through his polished control. "I built everything I have from nothing, Isabella. I've faced men twice as ruthless as Trevor, and I've never bent. But you..." His voice dropped lower, the anger giving way to something dangerous in its honesty. "You are the first thing I've found worth risking it all for." Her breath caught, torn between the warmth of his words and the weight of their consequences. The air between them pulsed with unspoken truths, but before she could answer, her phone buzzed again. A new message from Trevor. One line, sharp as a blade. Dinner tonight at 8. Come alone, or the world sees everything. Her blood ran cold. The message wasn't a plea. It was a summons. Trevor wasn't finished. He was only beginning. She looked up at Damien, fear and fury colliding in her chest. He'll never let me go. He doesn't want me back. He wants to own me, to destroy me if he can't. Damien's expression hardened into something terrifyingly certain. Then we stop letting him write the rules. Tonight, we take this war to him. Isabella could barely feel her own legs as she paced the length of the penthouse living room, her nerves a wildfire spreading faster than she could contain. The words on Trevor's message, still burned in her mind. Come alone. Dinner at 8. The demand was simple, but the threat beneath it was unmistakable. Every minute that passed brought her closer to a decision she didn't know how to make. Damien sat on the edge of the sofa, his phone forgotten on the table, his gaze locked on her like he was trying to anchor her in place. He looked unshakable, but she could see the storm gathering just beneath his surface. He wasn't a man who waited. He was a man who acted, and Trevor had crossed into his world now. You're not going, he said finally, his voice calm but carrying steel. He doesn't want dinner. He wants control, and if you walk into his trap, you're handing him exactly what he craves. Isabella stopped pacing, her chest rising and falling in sharp bursts. And if I don't go, he'll release the photos. He'll drag both of us through the mud. My reputation can't survive that. Yours might, but mine. Her voice cracked. It will destroy everything I've built. Damien stood then, closing the distance between them in measured steps. He took her trembling hands in his and forced her to meet his eyes. You are not alone in this. He thinks fear will make you bend. But I don't bend, Isabella. Neither will you. She searched his face, desperate for a reason to believe, and saw no hesitation, just determination, the kind of iron forged from years of fighting battles she couldn't yet imagine. But Trevor was unpredictable, and the danger he carried wasn't just business or reputation. He was personal. He was the kind of danger that slithered into the cracks of your life until you couldn't breathe without feeling it. She shook her head, pulling away. You don't understand. Trevor doesn't give up. The more you push him, the more desperate he'll become, and desperate men do terrible things. Damien's voice dropped lower, a dangerous promise. Then he'll learn what happens. When he corners someone I care about, the word lingered in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Care. Her heart leapt and faltered at the same time. She wanted to lean into it, to let herself feel the safety his presence offered. But fear was louder. The city skyline darkened as evening fell, the lights outside flickering to life, and Isabella knew the hour was closing in. She imagined Trevor waiting, smug, confident she would come. She imagined the envelope of photographs, ready to detonate her career and tarnish Damien's empire. Finally, she turned to Damien, her voice raw. What if he's already won? What if no matter what we do, he takes everything from me? Damien stepped closer, his shadow falling over her, his words carrying the weight of a vow. Then we rewrite the ending. We don't wait for him to strike. We go to him on our terms. She blinked, her breath catching. What are you saying? I'm saying you won't go alone tonight. If Trevor wants to see you, then he sees both of us, and he learns the cost of trying to break what he can't control. Her pulse thundered, her fear colliding with a rush of defiance she hadn't felt in months. For the first time since Trevor had begun his endless pursuit, she felt the faint spark of something stronger than fear. Hope. But as she nodded slowly, silently agreeing to face what waited at 8, neither of them saw the camera lens hidden across the street, recording every moment through the glass. The trap was already wider than either of them realized. The restaurant chosen by Trevor was not a coincidence. Isabella recognized it the moment she stepped through the door with Damien at her side. It was the same place Trevor used to bring her during their better days, when he played the role of charming boyfriend instead of the man who slowly tightened a leash around her life. Every table gleamed with crystal glasses, the chandeliers glittered above. But to Isabel, the air felt suffocating, thick with ghosts of a past she wanted buried. Trevor was already waiting. He sat near the window, dressed immaculately in a tailored suit, his smile practiced and hollow. The envelope lay on the table in front of him, as though he wanted them to see it the moment they arrived. He rose when they approached, extending his hand to Damien first, a gesture more mockery than courtesy. Damien didn't take it. His piercing stare was enough to cut through the facade. Isabella sat down across from Trevor, her heart hammering in her chest, every instinct screaming to run. Damien remained beside her, close enough that she could feel his steady presence like armor. Trevor's eyes flicked between them, a shadow of annoyance crossing his face at the display of unity. "You came," he said softly, as though they were old lovers meeting in secret. "And you brought your new protector. I suppose I shouldn't be surprised." Damien's voice was quiet, but sharp as glass. "Get to the point." Trevor's grin widened, and he tapped the envelope with one finger. "The point is simple. You, Isabella, walk out of here with me. You leave this little fantasy behind, and in return, these photos never see the light of day." He slid the envelope slightly across the table, just far enough that Isabella could touch it if she wanted to. Her fingers twitched, but Damien's hand covered hers before she could move. She looked up at Trevor, summoning every ounce of strength she had left. "I'm not yours to claim, Trevor. Not now, not ever again." The smile slipped. His jaw tightened, though his voice remained smooth. "You think this man cares about you? He'll use you until he's bored. That's what men like him do. Then where will you be, back where you started? Alone." Damien leaned forward, his voice low and lethal. "You've spent months trying to break her, to make her doubt herself. But here's the truth, Trevor. She doesn't need me to fight you. She's stronger than you'll ever be. I'm just here to remind you of what happens when you cross the line." Trevor's mask cracked then, rage flickering in his eyes. He grabbed the envelope and threw it across the table. The photos spilled out, glossy images scattered like shards of glass. He slammed his palm on them, his voice rising. "Do you see? This is all it takes. One headline, one rumor, and everything you've built, both of you, burns." The restaurant around them had fallen silent. Eyes turned toward the scene, whispers starting to stir. Isabella's breath came fast, her chest tightening, but she felt Damien's calm beside her like a steady flame. She reached for the photos, gathering them into her hands, and then she did something she hadn't planned. She tore them in half, one after another, her hands shaking but determined. Trevor's face drained of color as the shredded pieces fell to the table. Isabella's voice was unsteady but fierce. "You don't control me anymore. Not with fear, not with lies, not with anything." For a moment, Trevor just stared, stunned that the leash he had kept around her neck had finally snapped. Then his expression shifted into something darker, colder, the kind of look that made Isabella's stomach twist. "You've made a mistake," he whispered. "Both of you. This isn't over." He rose from the table, his eyes narrowing on Damien, as if measuring him for the war to come. Then he turned and walked out, his shadow stretching long across the polished floor. Isabella sat trembling, the remains of the photos scattered like ashes. Damien placed his arm around her shoulders, steadying her, his voice a promise against her ear. "He won't touch you again. Not while I'm breathing." Yet even as she leaned into his strength, Isabella couldn't shake the dread coiling in her gut. Because Trevor hadn't left defeated, he had left planning, and the next move would be far worse than photographs. For a brief moment, life almost felt normal again. Days passed after the confrontation at the restaurant, and Isabella allowed herself to believe Trevor had finally been silenced. The penthouse was filled with laughter, design sketches, and the quiet rhythm of two people learning each other's worlds. Damien seemed lighter, his edges softened when he looked at her, his long days punctuated with stolen moments that left her breathless. For the first time in months, Isabella slept without waking, in fear. But peace has a way of lulling hearts into forgetting the storm that always waits just beyond the horizon. It came crashing back on a cold evening when Damien returned from a board meeting earlier than expected, his expression carved with fury. He placed a file on the kitchen counter, his hands clenched tight, as if he might crush it. Isabella opened it, and her blood ran cold. Pages of leaked documents, financial reports twisted into lies, contracts altered to look incriminating. Damien's empire painted as corrupt, unstable, dishonest. The kind of scandal that could ruin a man overnight. He looked at her then, his eyes burning. Trevor didn't just follow you, Isabella. He had help. Someone inside my company. Someone I trusted. The betrayal cut deeper than Isabella expected. She thought Trevor's obsession had reached its peak, but this was more calculated, more dangerous. And then Damien's voice dropped lower, heavier. It was my assistant, the one who kept clothes here, the one I thought was thorough, loyal. She's been feeding Trevor information for weeks. Isabella staggered back, her mind reeling. The woman who smiled politely, who arranged schedules and delivered files, had been watching, waiting, undermining. It explained the photographs, the way Trevor always seemed to know. What does he want now? She whispered. Damien's jaw tightened. To burn everything I built, and to take you back into the ashes. The thought twisted her stomach. Trevo wasn't just chasing her out of obsession. He wanted destruction. He wanted to prove that if she didn't belong to him, she couldn't belong to anyone. That night, the war reached its peak. Trevor stormed into a shareholder gathering Damien had arranged, waving the altered files and shouting accusations. Cameras flashed, voices rose, the chaos threatening to tear everything apart. Isabella stood frozen at the edge of the crowd, terror clawing at her throat. If Trevor won, Damien's empire would collapse, and she would be branded as the woman who had brought it all down. But Damien didn't flinch. He stepped forward with the calm authority that had built his empire, his voice cutting through the noise like thunder. Every claim Trevor made, every paper he waved, Damien countered with evidence of his own. His legal team was already waiting, the trap already set. The assistant who betrayed him had been caught, her bank records traced to Trevor. The proof was undeniable. Security closed in, and Trevor's rage finally broke through his smooth mask. He lunged, not at Damien, but at Isabella. His hand reached for her arm the way it had that night outside the gallery, the way it always had when he wanted to remind her of his control. But this time, Isabella did not flinch. She stood her ground, her voice shaking but strong enough to echo. You don't own me, Trevor. You never did. Damien was there in an instant, pulling Trevor back, his fist connecting with a sickening force. Security dragged Trevor away as he screamed her name, his fury echoing long after he was gone. The room settled, the chaos thinning into whispers. Cameras captured everything, but what the world would see was not a scandal of corruption. They would see a man who had been targeted and a woman who had finally found her voice. Later, when the crowd dispersed and the lights dimmed, Isabella stood by the window of the penthouse she had once called cold and lifeless. It no longer felt that way. The deep blues she had chosen, the warmth she had added, it was Mo's breathe and design now. It was proof of survival, of transformation. Damien joined her, his arm wrapping around her waist, his voice quiet against her ear. It's over. She leaned into him, her body finally exhaling months of fear. Not just over, she whispered. It's the beginning. For the first time, the future didn't scare her. It glowed ahead of her like the city lights, unpredictable but hers to claim. Damien had fought for her, but she had fought too, and together they had turned obsession into ashes. And though the world outside would keep whispering about the billionaire and the designer, Isabella knew the truth. She had opened her eyes in a stranger's bed and stepped into a story far greater than she could have imagined. But she had walked out of it not as someone saved, but as someone reborn.